This week in 1776. On June 26, 1776, the Continental Congress stood only days away from one of the most important decisions in American history. The Committee of Five had already completed the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson's words had been reviewed by John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston before being presented to Congress. Now the delegates began studying the document line by line. Many members supported independence, but they also understood that every sentence would become part of history. The language needed to justify revolution not only to Americans, but to the entire world. Outside Philadelphia, the war continued. British forces were assembling the largest expeditionary force ever sent across the Atlantic. More than 30,000 soldiers and sailors were converging on New York. General George Washington knew the attack would come soon. Meanwhile, Congress debated words. Washington prepared for battle. The contrast could not have been greater. One body was creating a new nation with ink and parchment. The other was preparing to defend it with muskets and cannon. History often remembers July 4th, but June 26th reminds us that independence required both ideas and sacrifice. The Declaration of Independence would mean little unless Americans were willing to defend it. On June 27th, 1776, Congress continued preparing for the final debate over independence. Delegates consulted constantly with one another. Some wanted stronger language condemning King George. Other worries that certain passages might divide the colonies instead of uniting them. Every word mattered. The delegates understood they were not writing a temporary political statement. They were creating the founding document of a new nation. Meanwhile, George Washington inspected the defenses around New York. He expected the British fleet at any time. The city sat on islands connected by rivers and harbors. It offered tremendous strategic advantages, but it also presented enormous challenges for defense. Washington's soldiers dug earthworks, mounted artillery, and trained whenever possible. Many had never faced professional European troops, yet morale remained surprisingly strong. The soldiers understood they were fighting for something larger than themselves. Congress and the Army were working toward the same goal. One sought legitimacy, the other sought survival. Within a week, those two efforts would become inseparable. On July 28, 1776, while Congress continued its work in Philadelphia, dramatic news arrived from the South. American forces under General William Moultrie successfully defended Charleston Harbor at Fort Sullivan against a powerful British naval attack. The fort was built primarily with palmetto logs and sand. Instead of shattering under British cannon fire, the soft palmetto wood absorbed the impact. British ships suffered heavy damage. The attack failed. The victory electrified the colonies. At exactly the moment Congress was debating independence, Americans had proven they could defeat the world's greatest navy. The victory also strengthened support for independence among delegates who still had doubts. Military success gave confidence that political independence might actually be possible. The fort would later be renamed Fort Moultrie. Even today, the palmetto tree remains as South Carolina's state flag, as a reminder of that remarkable victory. Sometimes history turns not only on speeches and documents, but on unexpected victories that change what people believe is possible. On June 29, 1776, Congress prepared for the decisive debates that would begin within days. Delegates received instructions from their colonial governments almost daily. Several colonies had recently changed their positions. What had seemed impossible only weeks earlier was rapidly becoming inevitable. Public opinion had shifted dramatically during the spring of 1776. Thomas Paine's common sense had convinced thousands that reconciliation with Britain was no longer realistic. British military actions had reinforced that conclusion. Congress could now see that political center was moving. The question was no longer whether independence would come. The question was how quickly Congress could declare it unanimously. Outside the State House, ordinary citizens sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. They did not know the exact day, but they knew history was accelerating. Sometimes revolutions happen gradually. Then suddenly, everything changes at once. That moment was only days away. On June 30th, 1776, the Continental Congress entered the final hours before the decisive vote. Delegates met privately throughout the day. They counted votes. They persuaded reluctant colleagues. They sought unanimity wherever possible. No one wanted the colonies divided at the very moment they declared independence. Several delegations, however, remained uncertain. New York still lacked authority to vote for independence. South Carolina and Pennsylvania had internal disagreements. But momentum continued to build. The delegates understood the consequences. If they approved independence, every man supporting it would become a traitor under British law. The penalty was death. There would be no turning back. Every delegate knew exactly what was at stake. The following day, Richard Henry Lee's resolution would come before Congress once again. The decision that had been postponed for weeks could no longer wait. The American colonies stood on the edge of becoming something entirely new. On July 1st, 1776, the Great Debate finally began. Richard Henry Lee's resolution declaring that the United Colonies are, and right ought to be, free and independent states, returned to the floor of Congress. For hours, delegates argued the future of America. John Adams delivered what many historians consider one of the greatest speeches of the American founding. He argued that independence was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. Opponents warned of war, economic hardship, and uncertainty. Supporters answered that those hardships already existed. Only independence offered hope for the future. When debate ended, Congress postponed the final vote until the following day to allow one last effort toward unity. The delegates wanted history to record not a divided Congress, but united colonies. July 1st was the day America argued its future. July 2nd would decide it. And on July 4th, Congress would explain that decision to the world, the revolution had reached its defining moment.